this meeting to order. And I'd like to take this opportunity to ask us to all stand and say the Pledge of Allegiance. And then pause for a moment of silence. I
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Just a moment of silence, please. Thank you. May I have a roll call to confirm that we have quorum?
Chairman Suggs,
Present.
Dr. Danita Johnson, Woods, sorry, it's still Johnson. Attorney Chantre Irvin,
Present.
Dr. Vanessa Allen McLeod,
Present.
and Mr. Glenn Johnson.
Present.
We have a quorum.
We have a quorum, we can officially conduct business. I'd like to have a motion to accept the agenda for tonight's meeting.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded that we accept tonight's agenda. Is there any discussion on the motion? Hearing no discussion, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Abstentions? The agenda stands. At this time, I'd like to see the list for public comment.
You need to probably read your statement.
Having no one signing the public comment, I'll just kind of give that offer out there if there's anyone while I look for mine. I apologize here. I'd like to go on record that there was an executive session held today, March 20th at 4 p.m. No official action was taken during that session. The only thing that was discussed were the things that are described on the agenda that we have posted here today. On the notice, should I say. Moving on, I'd like to go to the interview training process, and I'd like to invite Dr. Hill and her team step forward.
Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
And as I indicated when we were in executive session, we are delighted to be here. Just to remind you that we are right on target in terms of the timeline that was created in January when you contracted with BWP relative to the search process. Tonight's activities are really going to focus on protocols for interviews and other phases of the search. It's important that the Board of Education be able to conduct interviews in a manner that will garner you the best possible candidate. So we're going to be reviewing some things. And we thought, while you have the packet that was sent to you, and in true teacher fashion, you had a homework assignment, which was to read through some of the documents so that we can summarize rather than having you read them as we go along. And we believe that this will enhance the interview process both for the board and for the candidates as well. So I want to start with talking about the nature of confidentiality. Daryl? Yeah. So confidentiality, what does it mean? Confidentiality is the notion that none of the information about the individual candidates should be shared. It is for the protection of the Board of Education as a whole, the protection of the individuals, as well as protection of the applicants. Giving you a concrete example, We had a breach of confidentiality in one school district, or a couple of school districts, in which the individual members were sued because they shared information that was of personnel nature. In one case, the board, a member of the board talked with another board member from a district of the candidate, and only the board members had the names of those candidates, so it wasn't from outside. And that candidate was then advised that they should not even plan to apply because they were not minority. That could lead to a lawsuit for discrimination for both the district and the individual. There was another instance where it was publicly printed in the newspaper, the list of candidates and applicants, and 2 people out of the 6 names that were listed lost their jobs because their community had lost faith in them relative to their desire to stay in the community. And then the third example I want to give really relates to, again, a candidate soliciting for support, which again breaches confidentiality. And ultimately, that candidate was then withdrawn from the search process because it becomes a question of ethics. If you cannot maintain confidentiality as a part of the candidate pool, then how can you be expected to maintain confidentiality in the workings of the school district as the superintendent? And so the notion of confidentiality is real. The Board of Education has been advised there is a confidentiality document which commits everyone to not sharing the information with anyone outside of the board and the board's attorney. Who does it affect? It affects all of us. It affects the candidates, it affects you, it slows down the process, it affects the community. So the notion of confidentiality is really important. And you want to say something else about it?
No, just that we've all agreed, that I think that everyone understands that we've all agreed together that that is one of the standards that we will set together to maintain confidentiality throughout the search process until it becomes necessary to share a name. So that's what we've all agreed to and how we'll move forward with the search. And we hold ourselves to that same standard. No one will know the candidates from us either, so it's a two-way street that we maintain for you as well as you maintain for the candidates.
Make sure you stick in the line. Make sure you stick in the line.
Yeah. Thank you.
The next component, and again, we will sort of share this discussion, is the interview process is a two-way communication between the board and the candidate. You're not only just interviewing candidates, but they're interviewing you. People have to disrupt and change their lives in many instances to move into a superintendency in another state or even within the same state. And so as you are asking questions of them, they have done their research, they have done their homework. In many instances, they have observed board meetings or attended activities because they need to determine whether they want to come and work with you as well as for you. Do the next one. Plan strategy. Oh, no, go back. Flip back. No, one more forward. That one, stay there for a minute. Let's get through those. The strategy. One of the things that we suggest is that introductions are made of the board members. Introduction will be inclusive of the questions when you ask the candidates. You talk about the process. This is how we're going to do this. We will have a 1 hour session and you'll be asked a number of questions, and those we're asking you to be complete and concise in your answers. We will be taking notes. So you want to share with the candidate what the expectation is of that communication and that conversation. Your questions need to be pre-designed. We'll talk a little bit about pre-designing the questions.
Certainly. So we have prepared for you a bank some questions that you can choose or write your own questions based on those questions or other questions. We do want to say that they should all be based on the needs of the community and that we outlined in the leadership profile. We're asking that each of you have 2 questions that you coordinate and that you'll be asking all of the candidates during the interview process. And these candidates will be asking, these questions will be asked in the same order, in the same fashion. Now, oftentimes when you ask a question, you need something to clarify an answer that a candidate has given you. That can be different for each candidate because they will each be giving you different answers. But it's very important that the interviews are fair and that each candidate deserves or has the same exact interview. We'll talk about how they're going to develop them.
Yes. So, in your packet, we gave you a list of, and I can cite the page. We gave you a list of possible questions. There probably are 40 or so questions. And so what we're going to ask you to do, Ann says 2, I'm gonna say at least 3 to 4. For you to identify 3 to 4 questions that you would like to ask of the candidates, all of them, related to the leadership profile. And you will send those questions to me and I'll send out an email reminder with the send by date. And we will then organize those questions based on who has determined which ones they want. And so that the same person will be asking the same question. And with the 5 of you, you'll probably be given 2 questions to ask. Because typically the questions for the candidates, you have about 10 of the concrete questions, and then a question in which you may ask them. For example, one of our questions is, what do you do for fun? Because we think it's important for the candidate to explain to us how they balance home life or their other part of their life and work life. One question that we ask them is, can you tell us of any things that might pop up in a Google search? We ask that question. So that gives them an opportunity to share ahead of time. So your questions will be designed based on what you give us that you want to ask. And they're under the subtopics that you'll see listed. They're the same subtopics that reflect your leadership profile. We also gave you a sample or the example of the questions that we asked during the interview. You may choose to use some of those, but know that those have already been asked. The candidates will not have the questions ahead of time. So you will receive from me the composite of the questions that you submitted, but they will not have had them before time. Okay, any questions about how the questions are designed or developed? We have given you some suggested rubrics for how to assess the responses. What you're looking for, what you're listening for. One of the components is that you're going to not only look for what they've said, but how they've said it. You're going to listen for depth. You want them to be able to provide specific examples, because one of the things that came out in your leadership profile is that you want proven information. So they should be able to give you some specifics, some data, some citations, and that plays into how you assess how well they responded to the question. You have an agreed upon strategy for accessing both the documents and the interviews and the references. So we've given you a sample of how you can do a multiple scoring so that you're all looking for similar things related back to the leadership profile. You're gonna get tired of hearing us say it all reverts back to the leadership profile. It's none of the wild card questions that you may wanna ask. You have to show how they connect, because that leadership profile was designed and developed from within your community. And so you're being responsive to what the community has said that they'd like to see happen with the next superintendent. And then finally, there should be a strategy for consensus building. consensus building is a way to reach a unanimous vote, both from the standpoint of the individual candidates as you go through the process, as well as when you get to the finalists. And sometimes we need some assistance in how to do that. So we're going to do an exercise a little bit later on consensus building. Selecting the candidates. How well do the documents submitted meet the leadership profile? We will be submitting to Attorney Colbert the documents, the personnel documents for the candidates, for the applicants that we are recommending, only to those. But you will have all of the, people ensure that you get access to their application, their cover letter, their letter of interest, their letters of recommendation, any school transcripts, so that you will have some access to all of their information prior to the interview. Prior to the interview.
Yeah, and we talk in the training manual about making sure that you're familiar with each of the candidates, thoroughly familiar, because not only does it make you a better interviewer, it makes they're complimented that you've taken the time to get to know them. So you're beginning to build that two-way communication relationship with the candidates when you've done that.
One of the things that will happen with regards to your rubric is, again, how well do they do the responses to the specific questions connect to the leadership file. So let me give you a concrete example. One of the things that you've talked about is having a leader that's a visionary. So one of the questions will be related to a visionary leader, and the question may be, explain to me how you describe yourself as a visionary leader. And the intent would be for them to provide you with an example. And I'm gonna take the privilege of sharing an experience I had as a visionary leader. In the community that I was in, a third of the population was Korean. And one of the concerns when I was interviewed with the board was the fact that the Korean population was not participating in school activities. And it was, so what will you do? Thinking ahead to our district and what it looks like as a visionary, what would you do to encourage that community to participate? So I did a couple of things, because one of the things I recognized is one way to find out what people need is to ask the question. And so I talked with some of our Korean staff members and said, help me. Tell me how I can engage with the Korean community. I asked the question. They said, well, you might want to come to our Saturday school, because the Korean population is not necessarily interested, like some Latino populations, in your worrying about teaching Korean in school. We've got that covered. But come to our site and see what we do. So I did. I visited their Korean school. They did not recognize that our public school session was as much theirs as any other group. So then they started asking questions. We could have our Asian celebration here in the gymnasium at the middle school? Yes, you could. So they did. The vision was how to incorporate them and make them feel more a part of our district, because they didn't feel like they were part. And so again, that your question connecting, getting a concrete example will be important in terms of connecting that to your leadership profile. Next, I want to talk about the selection of the candidates at the end, reaching the first level after you have looked at the 6 or so that you may be interviewing, is reaching consensus about those that you want to move along. You can't hire 6 superintendents. You could, but it really doesn't work. So you're really reaching for what are the most dire needs that we have, and how do these candidates represent themselves relative to that need? So when we talk about that, again, because you have asked everybody the same question, they've been done in sequence, you have a rating rubric for them as a group, then you will be able to make some determination as to who rises to the top of that group. So again, we're gonna talk about some strategies momentarily. Next slide, please. After you've looked at that initial 6 or 7 applicants and you've interviewed them and you've screened them and you're down to the last 2 or 3 that you think really, you know, are right there for you, you will want to engage in a different set of questions, a different level of questioning. It's more in-depth. It's usually fewer questions, but it requires much more in-depth conversation. We also then recommend that the candidate be prepared to do a presentation as a part of that interview. The board may determine what they want the topic or the subject to be, or you may leave it open for the candidate to come in. It's a short presentation. It's not designed to be half of whatever your interview schedule is. 10 to 15 minutes. Do you want them to come in and share how they problem solved a particular issue in their district that may be similar to something that you're experiencing and hearing? Do you want to see how they help develop the reading program for individual students, and you want them to walk you through that? Do you want them to come in and talk about community engagement and how they interact with the community? So you're gonna think through some things that by the time you get to that second level, you have really ramped up the expectation of people and how they respond to you. One of the components of the second level of interviews we also talk about is that it also is inclusive of a social component, where the candidate, those top 2 or 3 candidates are bringing in their family, or they're at least invited to bring in their family, to have a look at the district for themselves. Again, they might be moving here, they may already live here and have to make some adjustments. So the second level interview is much more in depth, much more selective. It's important that every board member have an opportunity to have contact with those top 3, because one of them is going to be your superintendent. And we talked about reaching consensus. You will have learned these consensus building strategies, and now we want to talk about taking that same strategy and applying it to your semifinalists. Next slide, please. So, what is consensus building? We already talked about it. It's getting everybody to agree. There are several strategies, and I'm going to have you turn to page.
I don't think it's numbered, but
It comes after the interview questions and after the rating rubric.
it's about the 4th page from the
back.
Actually, the activities, page 3, I think, from the back. One with the fist. Is that what you're looking for? That's it.
Find it? Yep, that
You got
one.
it.
Yep, that's the one. So I'm gonna give you a couple of controversial topics. And we're gonna use one of these strategies in order to see what your consensus building looks like. Because, you know, I'm still a teacher. Rank order elimination. Let's start with that. When you rank order elimination, you talk about the least favorite amongst you. So let's talk about fruit. We're gonna take bananas, oranges, apples, and pears. Bananas, apples, oranges, pears. Which one do you think works best for, no, which one do you think works least for a toddler that is just learning to walk and eat and, chew gum at the same time. So for a toddler, which one of those do you think is the least best for them? Let me hear you.
Pears,
Why?
they're hard.
Okay.
They may not have all their teeth.
Okay. Anybody else? You all gonna agree with him with pears?
I was thinking pears, so I'm gonna.
So, okay, but that's
You're
good, that's good.
You're good.
Somebody else wanna do a different one?
Choose the microphones.
I was thinking bun cakes.
Pancakes was not one of the selections.
Focus, counselor.
Pancakes was not one of them. So, okay, so we're going to eliminate pears as the one that's the least easy for them. What would be the second least?
Somebody said apple.
Apple?
Yeah.
Why?
Again, it's hard. The outside of the apple would maybe choke the child in trying to choose.
Skin.
Okay. Anybody want to counter that and think that one of the others? Oranges? Or bananas? You think bananas would be the best? Why?
I think it's easy for a young child to access. They may not even need help, they just need to squeeze.
Mush all over it. Mush banana all over it.
But the cleanup is probably more challenging for the parent.
Okay, so in that process, what did you hear? What did you see? What did you experience relative to rank order elimination?
Head nodding, people kind of agreeing just by listening or,
What else did I ask you to do?
What, to eliminate?
To eliminate, but in your answer, what else were you asked to do? What did you have to do when you said pairs?
share why.
Yes.
That's a critical mass. One of the things in rank order elimination is you want to discuss why you've given it that rank. And some people may want to take issue with that, or people may agree and say, yeah, that's logical, that makes sense. So in looking at candidates, you can take all of them and do a rank order elimination, but you have to be able to substantiate why you rank them that way.
That especially works when you've got your first round of interviews and you're trying to narrow that down to those that you would like to come back, invite back. We find that boards have a lot of success in agreeing on maybe the one that, they're all gonna be good, but agreeing on the one that they could pass the easiest on. So we find that is a very useful way of beginning that process of narrowing down a candidate pool.
Okay, any questions about that? Okay, pairwise comparisons. In this one, each voter gives a complete ranking of the candidates. For each pair of candidates, the number of voters preferring are compared. So again, the candidate that receives the most votes, that goes to the top of his list. So everybody takes a look at it, and that was kind of what we did when we looked at the applications. We looked at the applications, we looked at the profile, and we said, okay, we need for you to determine a 1, 2, or 3 for this candidate. And we didn't have any discussion about the candidate then. That was our own interpretation of a 1, 2, or 3. And a 1 was a candidate that we definitely thought met the profile. And a 2 was a candidate that had, some positive things, but a 3 was a candidate that, no, we're not sure that they're where we want them to be. Then we went down the list and again talked about, okay, so how many of you have this person as a 1? How many of you have this person as a 2? So we went through all 38 applicants and did the pairwise comparison. And that enabled us to then group applicants, and you're gonna have 6 or 7, so it'll be easy for you to do, in order to see where they stand if you're looking at a list. Unlike the elimination, you let go of some people. You let go of the pairs. You're not gonna do pairs at all. You're gonna go right to bananas. This gives you an opportunity to see how many ones you have, how many 2s you have, how many 3s you have, in terms of then making that comparison.
And while Dr. Hill did explain to you that we don't have any discussion before we do this, once we have shared our rankings, then we begin to have our discussions and talk back and forth about why we ranked that candidate a little bit higher than another one.
Of course, some of us get creative, and we had
2 minuses.
2 minus versus 1 plus. I mean, people got very creative with the number.
And Dr. Hill says no 3 pluses. No 3 pluses. There are 3, it's a 3.
But yeah, does a 2 minus equate to a 3 plus? I mean, so we kind of play with that. But that again allows you to have this basis of comparison amongst the candidates that you're looking for. My favorite one is the next one, FIST to 5. FIST to 5 is whenever a group discussing a possible solution or coming to a decision on any given matter. It's a good tool to determine what each person's opinion is at any given time. So, to use this technique, the team leader restates a decision the group may make and asks everyone to show their level of support. Each person responds by showing a fist or a number of fingers that corresponds to their opinion. If it's a 5, it's a no. And no vote, which is a way to block consensus. And usually that means I need to talk more on the proposal, and it needs to have some modifications, some requirements. Something has to change in order for me to even consider it. A 1 finger means that you still need to discuss certain issues and suggest changes that might make you move to be more supportive of that particular piece. 2 fingers, I'm comfortable with the proposal, but would like to discuss some minor issues. 3 fingers, I'm not in total agreement, but I feel comfortable that this decision or proposal will pass without us having to talk about it further. 4 fingers, I think it's a good idea to have a discussion or decision, and we'll work for it. And 5 fingers, it's a great idea, and I want to be one of the leaders in implementing it. If anyone holds up fewer than 3 fingers, they should be given the opportunity to state their objections, and the team should address their concerns. Teams continue the FIST to 5 process until they achieve consensus, minimum of 3 fingers or higher across the board, to determine that they must move on to the next issue. So, FIST to 5, travel. Cars, traveling by car, traveling to a destination by car. We're going to take this board, we're going to do this board retreat, and we're going to do this board retreat in Kentucky. Well, let's make it a little bit further away. Tennessee. We should travel by car. Vote, FIST to 5. Use your fist.
I guess maybe.
Okay. All right. Okay, so you see how that,
And then that leads to the discussion.
right, so, Mr. Suggs, why do you think you need to drive all the way to Tennessee?
I don't.
He was in the
He was the fifth, he was absolutely not, okay. Why, who thought that it was a good idea?
We had a 3, so then we, yeah.
I mean,
Talk why, give us some reasoning why.
I mean, Nashville is a 4 or 5 hour drive, so I can deal with that. You know, if you're talking about going to New Orleans, then no, I'm not driving to New Orleans.
Okay, so it really had to do with the distance.
Yeah.
And so again, that becomes a part of your conversation, that if we can address the distance, Like you said, if we're going to Nashville, that's one thing, but if we're going to San Diego, that's something altogether different. You know, you have that conversation. We had one.
Who's driving?
Who's driving?
Yeah, that
You
becomes.
could ride.
Yeah. You need to discuss who's driving, you know, what the time frame is everybody going together? Are you going in two separate cars? I mean, there's a lot of discussion that needs to happen after that. Dr. McLeod, you voted, you don't want to do it at all. You were with Mr. Suggs, who thinks that driving is you need to get on the train. How many people want to go on the train? 55.
Trying to be fun.
Okay, but you see how that goes in terms of continuing to have that conversation? How many people want to fly? Look at what you've got going here. Okay, so that's a way to reach consensus, to continue the conversation, to add changes, to supplement, to talk it out in terms of looking at your candidates. And then the final one is the scoring system, the thumbs. And the thumbs, which is on the last page, and it says, this strategy is simple and easy to use with larger groups, because it's easy to visualize. It lends itself to expanding understanding of others' views and perspectives, as well as highlighting the fact that something may have been overlooked. A thumb pointed up signifies full agreement. A thumb pointed sideways signifies we have to have some more conversation about this. I'm not there yet, or I'm not totally for and I'm not totally against. A thumb down, we all know that the thumb down means no way, Jose. Not gonna do it, not having that. So, let's practice. And because I don't know what it is about me and food, but we're going to have a board dinner.
With bunt cake.
You are not getting one of those bundt cakes. Staff, do not let them have one of those bundt cakes. So, we're selecting the type of food that you're gonna have. I think you should do Mexican. We're just gonna leave Mr. Suggs, we're not feeding him. No, his to the side indicates that he can go along with it. It was maybe not his favorite, but he can go along with it. Guacamole, no sour cream, you know, all of that stuff. So those are how those systems work in terms of your conversation and discussion. And yes, you want them to be serious, but you also want to be able to have an opportunity to have some real discussion and some real dialogue relative to the issue at hand. And in this case, it's going to be your candidates.
What we find is that, these are simple consensus building activities. We find the board start to use them for other discussions as well, because they are simple and you got a quick read on each other and what you thought. And just to add to all the things that Dr. Hill has said, I think one of the things you want to leave the room with is saying that you all ended up at 3, which means you can support the decision, and that everybody got to say what was on their mind. So we want to make sure that when you leave the room, when you've made your decisions, that you feel like you've had a chance to speak up. And that's the important part of doing some of these activities, that everybody gets a voice in the activity. We don't want anybody to leave the room and have what we call a parking lot meeting, where they're still discussing what went on in the consensus building meeting.
So once you have established your meeting times, you're going to identify a person who's going to be the greeter. More often than not, it's usually the board chair. You will have someone who will provide the information to the candidates. One of the things that we recommend once you get through your questions is that you give the candidate an opportunity to ask you a question or two. But again, remember, you reminded them at the beginning that this session is going to last, an hour and 15 minutes or an hour and a half or 60 minutes, so that you can maintain a control of that time. Periodically, when we do our interviews, we have to remind candidates, well, we only have 15 more minutes to go and we have 7 questions left. And so we need to have you move this along. We want you to continue to be complete, but also be concise.
Because it's important that you give each candidate the, not to the minute, but the same amount of time, because some people will take more time if they are not, if you're not watching it, and they'll say, oops, that candidate went 15 minutes over. And that's not fair to the candidate who went before them or after them, so watch your time.
Now, there are some do's and some don'ts in terms of that. And I'm going to look at Attorney Tolbert, because he's gonna help me out with this. There are things that you cannot ask in an interview. They're against the law,
Page 8.
and you may want to do that.
What if I ask nicely?
No matter, you can pretty it up, you can ask nicely, you can put a $20 bill on it, you still cannot ask that question. So, Mr. Tolbert, would you like to share with us?
Typically, you stay away from, age is a big one. Depending on how strict you wanna be. I don't think marriage is, appropriate either. I think you probably need to stay away from that as well.
Gender?
Well, yeah, sexual orientation, obviously, and even religion too is probably a red flag as well.
And again, back to that, what can happen to you is you can be sued. So another story, in another district, at a public meeting that was televised, a board member indicated that they were not going to vote for the candidate because they thought he was too old and he had an accent. So what do you think happened as a result of that out there in the public? What do you think the consequences are?
Litigation.
Possible.
Probably the guy probably heard it. Oh, sorry. He probably heard it and decided that it was discriminatory, that he was being discriminated against, and so he filed a complaint, a legal action against the board.
And against the individual that said it.
Oh, yes.
So you need to know that he won, and the board had to compensate him a year's salary. He didn't get the job, but they still had to pay him a year's salary. And I think they're still in litigation with the civil suit that he filed with the individual board member. So again, we've listed in the document those don't ask, don't tell comments. And again, it's helped when you have your questions already generated so that you don't stray into things such as sexual orientation, religion, age, disabilities, all of those things.
Pregnancy is.
Yeah, I was gonna say family too.
Yeah, now some candidates may bring up their families, and that's fine. I mean, we're all proud of our families and probably talk about it more than we realize, and your candidates may do that, which is fine. You brought it up.
For example, like I said, one question we ask is, so what do you do for fun? Legitimate question. And we had people that say, well, I've got 4 kids and I do such and so, such and so, or I love family time with my 3 teenagers. Go figure. But that becomes voluntary from them and not you probing to get that information to maybe color your perspective of that individual candidate. Okay, so we're getting to the end now. What's your homework assignment?
Read the questions and select 2 each. So that
She wanted you to do 3, I think, or 3 or 4.
3 or 4.
3 or 4.
You're only gonna ask 2, but we wanted you to have a variety to start out with.
And then what happens to them?
Send them to.
You didn't know anything about those
Oh,
books.
okay. Send them to you.
And they're listed in some suggestions. You may want to toggle with the language, but you don't want to toggle too much because again, you want it related to the leadership profile.
I think what you want to do with the language is if there are terms that are used in the district, or they're more, ours is a generic question, so if there are more terms that are more common in Indiana or in the district, you can certainly substitute some of those terms.
So once we have the question, then do we ask every candidate the same question?
Absolutely.
So that we measure by the
Same order.
Okay.
And we have to get those to you, say by tomorrow at noon? What did you say? Oh.
No, I did not say that.
Okay.
I'm really waiting to see what the date is for your, when you set scheduling your interviews.
Okay.
And then I'll take those and coalesce them all and create a list. And again, I'm gonna be looking to see where I think your question lies with the profile. So if I can't figure out how to maneuver it with the profile, I may be contacting you and saying, tell me what you were thinking about with this particular question and where it fits in the profile. And the profile, again, is designed to be the blueprint. We utilized it for screening the applicants. We're asking you to utilize it for screening the applicants. That's what they've become familiar with. I think in all of our interviews, people talked about having seen the community engagement report and gleaning a better understanding of where some of the community concerns are, what they thought the strengths were, but more importantly, looking at the skill sets and characteristics that you said you're looking for, and seeing if it matched their expertise. Because there were a lot of good educators, but not every educator had a good, solid match. And we tried to pick the top that matched your profile, which would be different in another district. So, question. You feel like you're ready to take on interviewing candidates?
Yeah, absolutely.
Thanks.
Oh,
I gotta
yeah.
do this.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Let me see the thumbs. Okay.
Very good.
Any other
Never
questions?
overachiever there.
Any other questions for us?
Yeah, will you sit in on the interviews or at least be there
That would
to
be enough.
introduce and then drop off?
That would be enough.
Okay,
We're a phone call away.
okay.
But the reason, and there's a reason for that too, because if we're in the room, the dynamic is different. There's just no way it isn't. And this needs to be someone who fits with the board and, doesn't look over to one of us to kind of say, what do they mean? It just would be different. It's hard to explain, but I'm sure you can recognize that in some of the things you've done too. It needs to be the five of you and the candidate at this point.
So board attorney,
The board attorney could be there, but he's usually sits and doesn't say much.
But yes, that's part of the board, so.
He's trying to make sure that you guys don't step over the line. Other thoughts, other questions? As Ann has indicated, you guys know that we're only a phone call or a text message away. We, again, purposely do not sit in on the interviews. We do the scheduling. We are the conduit for contacting with the candidates that you will be interviewing. So it all passes through BWP consultants in terms of setting up the time, giving them the information, both for the first and second round candidates. So they will not be in contact with you directly. Anything else? Mr. Tolbert, anything else?
Thank you.
Thank you for your time and attention. I can tell that you did your homework and you did some reading, because the document, which will be made available to the public, just gives you a lot of information that supports the kind of verbal presentation that we made tonight. There are two excellent articles that are included in the document, because we wanted you to see that it's not a BWP system of protocols and interviews. It's a national system of protocols and interviews for candidates, not only superintendent candidates, but for any kind of leadership position candidate.
I do have a question. Do you have any sort of a canned response if there are media inquiries that you can maybe work with Ms. Whittington on? I don't know if you had something canned.
If the media, again, we create everything from scratch. So if there's a media question, then we'll work with how do we resolve it. For example, we talked about the fact that once the board has had an opportunity to put together their interview protocol, and then this document, the board can determine when it becomes a public document. And so they'll work with you, or work with Irma, or work through me, say now it can be placed online, via the website, or you can make copies. We think, and it's not usual that we do the training in public session, but we think that it's good for the public to know how this process unfolds, and that there really is a science to it, that it's really based on research, and it's really based on consistency. And so it's okay for the public to see the kinds of questions that are asked, recognizing that no one will see the actual questions that are going to be asked, but the board. But it gives you a feel for what those kinds of questions look like and look for. And then it reminds the community of the strengths, the challenges, and the leadership profile, which is all what this is all based on. So again, I think I, as a teacher, wanted to take it as a learning opportunity to share with the community how this process of conducting these interviews unfolds and what some of the rules of the road are relative to that. That concludes our training.
Thank you. There's time on our agenda now for comments from the board. I'd like to open the floor to see if there's any board comments. I just want to publicly thank our search firm for doing a thorough job in preparing us for this process, going through our successful posting and getting us to this point. And so it's appreciated, and I feel confident that we have what we need to move forward.
Yeah.
Except for the
Any
cake.
other board comments? I do see a hand.
Can't take public comment.
When we adjourn, you may be able to comment individually to a board member. I'll entertain a motion for adjournment.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
The meeting is adjourned. Thank you.